The wine hit me before the words finished leaving her mouth. A full glass of Cabernet, cold and sharp against my skin, streamed down my silver dress in front of 200 guests. The scent of tannins and oak clung to me as the deep red stain spread across the fabric, blooming like a wound. For a moment, the string quartet faltered. Forks froze above china plates. I could hear the whisper ripple like wind through dry leaves. Elder abuse? Is that what this is? Some lifted their phones to record, eager to preserve my humiliation. It was my son's wedding day, and it was my daughter-in-law, Sloane, who had just drenched me in wine because I refused her demand. She stood there, flawless in white silk, her hand still trembling from the force of her gesture. Her voice cut through the stunned silence. "Give us the villa, Alma. $7 million. You don't need it. We do. My name is Alma Hart. I am 69 years old, a widow, and the keeper of the Hart Villa, the only true inheritance my late husband and I built with our hands and our years." That villa was the backdrop of birthdays, illnesses, and quiet triumphs. The place my son Evan once called our castle. Now, on his wedding day, his new bride demanded it as if it were nothing but a pawn on her chessboard. I lifted the napkin from my lap and pressed it calmly against the wet fabric, dabbing away the dripping Cabernet. My heart thundered, but my voice came out steady. "You worry about losing face, Sloane. I worry about losing myself." The silence in the hall deepened. Evan, my only son, sat frozen beside her, his gaze fixed on the polished floor. He would not meet my eyes, not once. I stood, each step deliberate, the marble echoing beneath my heels. No shouting, no scene, just the measured dignity of leaving a room where love had been traded for spectacle. As I passed through the gilded doors of the ballroom, I told myself something I had never dared to say aloud. This door is not a barrier. It is an escape. In the cool corridor, away from the heat of whispers, I reached into my small clutch. My fingers found the phone I carried everywhere, its surface worn from years of use. I dialed a number I knew by heart. When the line connected, my voice did not shake. "Ruth, it's Alma. I need you at the ballroom, tonight. Bring the papers. It's time. Ruth is my attorney and my oldest confidant, the only person besides me who knows the full story of the Hart Villa." She hesitated only a moment before answering. "Are you sure, Alma? Once this begins, there is no turning back. There is nothing left to turn back to," I whispered. "Come. Minutes from now, when those doors open, she will freeze in fear." I slipped the phone back into my purse and walked toward the exit. The air outside carried the scent of roses and night-blooming jasmine from the hotel gardens. My dress clung heavy and cold to my skin, but a strange relief coursed through me. They thought the wine was the end of me. They had no idea it was only the beginning. Before I take you further into this night, let me pause for just a moment. If you have ever felt silenced or underestimated, and you believe in stories where dignity is reclaimed, I would be grateful if you liked this video, subscribed to the channel, and turned on the notification bell. That way, you will not miss what comes next in this journey. Because what unfolded after that glass of wine was not just about a villa worth $7 million. It was about truth. It was about justice. It was about a mother who finally chose not to remain silent. When I stepped out into the cool night air, the sting of wine still heavy on my skin, my mind traveled backward, not to the humiliation in that ballroom, but to the years that shaped the woman who would not collapse tonight. The truth is, the Hart Villa was never just an asset. It was a covenant, paid for with years of sacrifice and stubborn endurance. I remember when Robert, my late husband, first laid the plans across our kitchen table. The villa was a dream drawn on paper napkins, lines smudged with coffee rings. We could not afford it, not really. But Robert believed in building something that would last beyond both of us. I took on 2 jobs then, teaching during the day and waitressing at night, while Robert patched roofs and hauled lumber on weekends. Every dollar was stretched to breaking, every bill paid late, but paid nonetheless. I remember my hands raw from carrying trays, my eyes heavy from grading papers at midnight, and the quiet pride when the loan officer finally slid the contract across the desk. The loan was ruthless, the kind of interest rates banks use to force on young couples they did not believe in. But we signed anyway, because we were not buying walls. We were buying permanence, a place our child could anchor himself no matter how stormy the world became. Years later, I can still see little Evan at 8 years old, running across the half-finished terrace with chalk in his hand. He drew crooked towers and dragons, declaring it our castle. He looked up at me with those earnest eyes children have before the world teaches them calculation. "When you're old, Mom, I'll take care of you." I promise. I pressed my palm to his messy hair, laughing through my exhaustion. Promises from children feel eternal when you're desperate to believe them. In those early days, we had nothing extravagant to give him. No vacations abroad, no new bicycles every Christmas. But we had the villa, and within its walls, we stitched together a sense of abundance. We turned the dining room into a classroom when he struggled with fractions. We strung lights across the courtyard one summer when money ran too thin for gifts. And when the winters grew brutal, we slept in the same room to conserve heat. Evan nestled between us as if the villa itself could breathe warmth into his small body. There is one memory that clings sharper than the rest. Evan was 10 when he collapsed one night with a seizure. The hospital bill was more than our mortgage payment. Robert and I emptied savings, sold Robert's old watch, and still came up short. I begged the billing office for leniency. They gave us 1 week. I remember sitting at the kitchen table with tears falling onto the unpaid invoice. The villa's deed lay beside it like a hostage. That was when I placed a cedar box on the table and told Robert, "We will keep our fragments here." Proof that we survived inside went the hospital receipt, along with the silver cufflink Robert had pawned and reclaimed, and later the tiny sketches Evan made of the villa's turrets. That cedar box still rests in my study, its weight heavier than any safe. When I think of Sloane demanding the villa as if it were hers by right, I think of that box. I think of the cufflink scratched by years of wear, the faded hospital bill with numbers that once kept me awake at night. I think of Evan, his body shaking in a hospital bed, and me whispering over and over, "Breathe, baby. Just breathe." That is what the villa represents. Breath. It is survival and sacrifice sealed into stone and timber. Every insult Sloane throws at me, every accusation of selfishness, cannot erase the years I worked until my feet bled, so my son could wake up in a home with hope stitched into its walls. And yet, tonight, he bowed his head and let her pour wine on me. He forgot the promise he once made, the castle he claimed as ours. But I have not forgotten. I cannot. Because the villa is not only a place. It is a mirror of my life, a reflection of every battle I fought and every wound I concealed. As I stood by the garden's edge, wiping at my stained dress, I realized something. They think I am weak because I am old. But age is not fragility. Age is memory, and memory, when sharpened, can cut deeper than any blade. The villa is my memory made solid, and I will not surrender it. The stains of that wedding night were not sudden storms. They were weather long in the making. The signs had been there, scattered like broken glass, sharp enough to cut if only I had dared to press down sooner. I sometimes wonder if denial is not simply love in disguise, a mother's way of believing her child will come back to the promise he once made. But I saw the cracks. I did. It was B who first brought me proof. B has been my neighbor for 30 years, a retired accountant with eyes sharper than any auditor. One afternoon she arrived with papers in her hand, her face grave. "Alma, I need you to look at this." She laid down a photocopy of a loan application. At the bottom, in shaky script, was my name, my signature. Except it was not mine. The document was for a bridge loan, tens of thousands pledged against the villa. The handwriting was close, practiced, but I knew my own hand the way a violinist knows her bow. Someone had forged me. My stomach nodded as I traced the uneven loops. B's finger tapped the page. "This is criminal, Alma." Whoever did this committed fraud. It is a felony. I remember the dizziness, the way the room seemed to tilt as if the very walls were no longer trustworthy. To think that my name, the name I had once signed on hospital forms to save my son's life, could be stolen to sell away our home. B squeezed my wrist. "You cannot stay silent. This is more than family tension. This is a crime." Days later, another wound arrived. Miguel, a gardener who tends the hedges along the property line, knocked on my kitchen door with photographs in his hand. Miguel is a gentle man, never one for gossip, but his eyes betrayed anger. He told me he had seen Lorraine, Sloane's mother, walking with a real estate agent through the villa grounds. The pictures showed them near the terrace, pointing, calculating. They had not even bothered to hide. My throat tightened as I studied the images. Strangers surveying the home I had built, as though my absence were a formality. When Miguel left, I locked the cedar box in my study and sat in silence. The box felt heavier that night, as if it too understood the danger. The cufflink, the hospital bill, the sketches of towers, proof of survival, now felt like relics at risk of being plundered. That was when I realized I needed to do more than hope. I called Ruth. She has been my attorney since Robert passed. A woman of unshakable calm who knows the law like a conductor knows the score. I told her about the forged loan, the photographs, the pressure Sloane and her family had been applying. She listened without interrupting, only the soft scratch of her pen across paper. When I finished, there was a pause long enough to hear my own heart pounding. "Alma," she said, her voice low but firm. "They are not circling. They are advancing. We must act before they strip you of everything. I recommend a trust. Place the villa beyond their reach. Seal it with conditions they cannot break." "A trust," I repeated, tasting the unfamiliar word like medicine. "Would that keep it safe?" "Yes, and more. It ensures the villa passes where you choose, not where they demand. And we will prepare what I call a red folder, copies of every document, bank record, and transfer. If they try to challenge your competency, we will show the truth in black and white." I agreed, not out of vengeance, but out of survival. That night, I opened the safe where Robert and I once stored our modest savings. Inside, alongside his old letters and photographs, I placed the first documents Ruth had drawn up. The trust papers were crisp, smelling faintly of ink and promise. I slid them into a folder with a red cover and set it on the top shelf. That red folder became my shield, a silent sentinel against those who saw me only as a signature waiting to be stolen. The next weeks felt like walking on glass. Evan visited less, his voice over the phone clipped, distracted. When he did come, his eyes wandered, as if measuring the villa with invisible rulers. Once, I found a brochure for retirement communities tucked beneath the sofa cushion after he left. It was glossy, full of smiling faces and promises of safety. The implication was clear. They wanted me out. Still, I clung to dignity. I worked in the garden. I polished the cedar banister. I set flowers in the dining room as if to remind the villa that it was still alive. But at night, the weight pressed heavier. I would sit by the cedar box, running my fingers over the hospital bill's faded ink, whispering to Robert that I had not forgotten our pact. Protect the home. Protect the boy. Even if the boy had forgotten. By the time the wedding day arrived, the stage was already set. The forged signature, the photographs of strangers measuring my terrace, the brochures left like hints of exile. Sloane's hand pouring wine over me was not a surprise. It was simply the mask torn away, the final act of a scheme long rehearsed. But what they did not know was that I had rehearsed too. I had Ruth. I had Bea. I had Miguel. And I had a red folder waiting to speak when my voice might shake. I was not powerless. Not anymore. I returned to the ballroom when Ruth texted that she was at the door. The music had resumed. Laughter skimmed the marble. Cabernet cooled on my skin, but my pulse was steady. Ruth met me under the chandelier, a compact woman with steady shoulders and a leather portfolio. Beside her stood the venue manager. "Alma," Ruth said. "Ready?" I nodded. We stepped forward. Conversations thinned. Phones tilted toward us. Sloane turned. Her smile lacquered. Evan's jaw tightened. He would not meet my eyes. Ruth's voice carried without strain. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Ruth Adler, counsel to Mrs. Alma Hart. There are urgent matters for Mr. Evan Hart and Mrs. Sloane Avery Hart." The quartet stilled completely. Ruth opened her portfolio. First, effective immediately, Mrs. Hart rescinds and terminates any guarantees issued for this event's expenses. The venue has written notice. Payment obligations rest solely with the contracting parties. The manager inclined his head. Sloane laughed, brittle. "She's upset. She doesn't know what she's doing." Second, any guarantee related to the couple's lease is canceled by notice delivered today. 30 days to cure or vacate. Evan's shoulders slumped. A guest whispered that the old woman was dangerous. I was not dangerous. I was done being used. Third, Ruth said, lifting a red-tabbed folder. The Hart Villa is now held in an irrevocable trust. Title has transferred. Management and disposition are governed by a sealed directive executed this afternoon. No party here may demand or coerce conveyance. Sloane's color drained, then flared. "This is elder emotion," she shouted. "Everyone sees it." "She's confused." I stepped forward, the wet fabric cool against my legs. "At this age, I still read the fine print," I said. "You should try it." A few guests stifled laughs. Others stared. Phones lifted higher. Ruth lowered her folder. "Finally, any assertion that Mrs. Hart lacks capacity is defamatory. A capacity evaluation by her physician, dated last month, is on file. If further allegations are made, we will pursue remedies." Ruth handed copies to the venue manager, then to Evan and Sloane. Paper made a crisp sound. Sloane refused hers. We'll contest, she said. You can't just trap the house. You tried to trap me, I answered. The house is only a house. This is my life. The murmur grew. 2 teenagers near the bar filmed. Somewhere, a glass broke. Evan looked up. For a second, I saw the boy who once drew chalk turrets on the terrace. The boy who promised to care for me when I was old. His eyes fell again. The man returned. Ruth closed the portfolio. We are finished. She turned to the manager. If accounts are unresolved, address the contracting parties. Mrs. Hart is not a guarantor. We began to walk. Sloane stepped into my path, red lips trembling. You are humiliating us, she hissed. You'll regret this when you are alone. I felt the cedar box in my memory, the cufflink, the hospital bill, a child's thin breath. I have been alone before, I said. I survived. You poured wine on me because you could not read a boundary. This is the boundary she reached for my wrist. I moved back. Ruth moved forward. Do not touch my client, Ruth said, quiet as a closing door. Security drifted closer. Guests parted to make a lane. Flashes pricked like distant lightning. Whispers hardened into sentences. Elder abuse, forged signatures. The villa is in a trust. A guest touched my sleeve and murmured, "Good for you." At the threshold, I paused. The ballroom glowed, sugar flowers and spectacle. I glanced at Evan one last time. He stared at the floor, hands slack at his sides. A groom with no lines left to say. The sight pierced me more cleanly than the wine. Ruth touched my shoulder. Alma. I stepped through the doorway with her. The noise softened into a hum. Outside, the air felt cool. My dress clung, heavy. My spine felt light. The videos would spread soon. I could not control that. I could control this. The house was safe. My name was mine again. My voice belonged to me. We walked toward the lobby lights, and I planned what must come next. The morning after the wedding, I believed the worst was behind me. The wine had dried into a stiff crust on my dress, but the trust was sealed, the guarantees revoked, and I told myself that silence would settle. I underestimated how quickly desperation turns into escalation. 2 weeks later, a thick envelope arrived at my villa. The return address was a downtown law firm I did not recognize. My hands trembled before I even slit the seal. Inside lay a petition, stamped in blue ink, declaring that I, Alma Hart, lacked the mental capacity to manage my own affairs. I read the words again and again, as if repetition would soften them. Erratic, unsafe, unable to make rational decisions. My throat closed. Attached was a supporting affidavit signed by a physician, a man I had never met, asserting that my memory was failing, my reasoning impaired. It was Sloane's doing. I could see her hand in the careful venom. And Lorraine, her mother, had connections in every corner of this city. A family doctor willing to falsify a report was a small favor for the Averys. The implication was plain. If the court accepted this petition, I would be declared incompetent. Every account, every asset, every memory in paper form would be placed under someone else's control. I would become nothing more than a signature blank for them to fill in at their will. I set the petition on the cedar table in my study. The red folder sat above it, heavy with proof of my sanity, my order, my careful record-keeping. I touched its spine, reminding myself I was not defenseless. But my heart ached in a deeper place. It was not strangers who wanted to erase me. It was my son and his wife. I sat there until evening shadows filled the room, replaying the moment Evan was 10 and burning with fever. His small hand clutched mine. His eyes searched for safety. That night, I signed every form the hospital pushed toward me, never thinking of cost, only of keeping him alive. And now, decades later, my signature had become their target. The circle of care had twisted into a noose. At last, I called B. Her voice was brisk as ever. "Alma, you sound shaken." "They filed against me," I said, holding back tears. "They want the court to say I can't manage myself. They used a false doctor's note. They want me erased." There was silence on the line, then the scrape of her chair. "Listen to me," B said. "This is serious, but it is not final. We fight it with evidence, bank records, receipts, calendars, every proof that you are capable. We make a timeline. We gather witnesses, and we do it today." Her certainty steadied me. "Do you think we can win?" "We will not just win," B answered. "We will expose them. This is not family conflict anymore. This is attempted financial abuse. The court will see it if we build the case carefully." I hung up with new resolve. The cedar box still lay open on the desk, its relics of survival watching me. I placed the petition beside them, a fresh scar in the collection. Then I opened the red folder and began to sort. Utility bills paid on time, check registers, letters written in clear, steady script. Each piece was a stitch in a fabric I refused to let them shred. The night deepened. Outside, the villa was quiet, its windows reflecting the last light. I stood in the kitchen and brewed tea, though I barely drank. My reflection in the glass door looked tired, yes, but not broken. That reflection would not be erased by ink and lies. When I lay down, I whispered, into the darkness, "They think they can take my name. They think they can make me disappear. But I am still here, and I will not vanish into their paper cage." The battle lines were drawn. The humiliation of wine had been public. This was private, sharp, and intended to cut me off at the root. But I had allies now. Ruth with her law, Bay with her numbers, Miguel with his photographs. I had my own memory, fierce and exact. By filing that petition, they believed they had weakened me. What they had done was awaken me. I turned on my side, pulled the blanket close, and closed my eyes with a final thought. Tomorrow, I would begin gathering proof, one document at a time. And when we stepped into court, it would not be me who trembled. It would be them. The morning after the petition arrived, I cleared the dining table and spread out every folder I had ever kept. The villa's wide windows filled the room with pale light, as if even the sun knew I would need clarity. Bea arrived first, carrying her yellow legal pad and that sharp pencil she never seemed to dull. She pressed her lips together when she saw the stack of papers. "Good," she said. "You kept everything. Now we shape it into a weapon." She began with the bank records, lining them in careful rows. "Each payment proves consistency," she explained. "A woman who pays her bills on time is not incompetent." She slid copies of utility statements, check registers, and tax filings into neat piles. I watched her hands move, steady and exact, and felt my breath slow. Numbers, once a burden, became proof of my mind's order. Miguel came after noon, shy in the doorway, his cap clutched between his palms. "Señora Alma," he said softly, "I brought the photos." He laid a thick envelope on the table. Inside were images of Lorraine walking the villa grounds with real estate agents, pointing, assessing, whispering like vultures circling. One picture showed her near the terrace, hand gesturing toward the horizon as if she already owned it. My stomach clenched. Miguel's eyes burned with quiet anger. "You deserve better," he said. "Use these. Show the judge who they are." I thanked him with a hand over his, feeling the strength of community that Sloane and Lorraine had underestimated. I was not an old woman alone in a house. I was a woman with witnesses. As the day stretched on, I added my own contributions. Letters written in my hand, each word steady. Grocery lists with dates. A calendar marked with appointments. Everyone attended. And then, trembling, I reached for something deeper. I opened the cedar box. The smell of old wood rose, mixed with memories too sharp to breathe. I drew out the hospital bill from the night Evan's seizures nearly took him. I placed it on the table beside the forged loan papers Bea had discovered. The contrast struck me like lightning. One showed my hand signing to save his life. The other showed someone else faking my hand to erase my life. I could not stop the tears that slipped down, but I did not hide them. Bea only nodded, as if to say tears were also evidence. That evening, when Ruth arrived, the table looked like a courtroom already in session. She scanned each pile, adjusting her glasses, murmuring approval. "This is strong," she said. "The petition claims incapacity. What I see is structure, memory, accountability. We will make the court see it too." Her words steadied me, but a part of me still ached. I wanted to believe evidence would be enough, yet I knew courts are not built only on facts. They are built on perception, on how convincingly one voice drowns out another. I feared my voice might crack under the weight of betrayal. Later, when the house quieted and my helpers had gone, I sat alone with the red folder. I slid the new documents inside, bank statements, photos, letters, and whispered to Robert's memory, "I am building again, brick by brick. Not walls this time, but proof." But there was something else I needed to build. A letter. Not for the court, not for Ruth or Bea, for Evan. I took out a sheet of plain paper and stared at its emptiness. My hand hovered, hesitant, then began. "Dear Evan, do you remember the night of your seizure? Do you remember how your body shook and I held you through it? The doctors said the bills were more than we could manage. I signed anyway. I signed because your life was worth more than any ledger. I never thought my signature would become something you would try to steal. I am writing this not to shame you, but to remind you. The villa you are trying to take was our castle. You once drew it in chalk, promised you would care for me when I grew old. Evan, you are grown now, but promises still matter. I do not need the villa to prove I am strong, but you need to remember who you were before Sloane's hunger taught you otherwise. With love that still aches, Mother, I read it aloud to Ruth when she came back the next morning. She listened in silence, her eyes softer than usual. "You won't send it?" she asked. "No," I said. "It's not for him. It's for me. A witness statement to my own heart." She placed her hand over mine. Sometimes the letters we don't send are the ones that save us. We tucked the letter into the red folder, between bills and affidavits, as if it were evidence too. Evidence not of competence, but of care. When I closed the safe that night, the click of the latch sounded final, like the closing of a courtroom door. For the first time since the wine spilled across my dress, I felt steadier. They could accuse, they could falsify, they could gather lies. But I had gathered something stronger. Proof, memory, allies. And in the quiet of my villa, I whispered to the walls. They wanted me to vanish. Instead, I am preparing to be heard. I asked Evan to meet me at the villa on a late afternoon when the sky was soft with fading light. He arrived alone, his suit jacket wrinkled, his tie loose, carrying the weight of a man who wanted to be somewhere else. When he stepped into the foyer, his eyes darted around the familiar walls as though they were strangers to him. "Mom," he said, his voice flat. "You wanted to talk." I nodded and led him to the terrace where he used to play with chalk, where dragons and crooked towers once decorated the stone. I set 2 glasses of water on the table. No wine, no ceremony. Just truth waiting to be spoken. For a while we sat in silence. The fountain bubbled in the courtyard, filling the space his words could not. Finally, I asked the question I had carried like a stone in my chest. "Do you remember when you were 8 years old and called this place our castle?" He shifted, his eyes narrowing. "Of course I remember." "But Mom, things change. Life changes. Castles turn into burdens. Sloane and I need stability, and the villa is not your stability." I cut in, my voice calm but firm. "It is mine. It is the sum of every sacrifice your father and I made. You promised me once that when I was old, you would take care of me. Does pouring wine over me look like care?" He flinched, his knuckles tightening around the glass. That was Sloane. She was angry. She wanted to make a point. I didn't stop her, and maybe I should have. But you've made everything worse, Mom. You canceled the guarantees, locked the house in a trust, called lawyers into the wedding. Do you understand how humiliating that was for me? The words stung, but I forced myself to remain still. Humiliation is not watching your mother drenched in wine before 200 guests. Humiliation is not forged signatures and strangers surveying our home as though I were already dead. You are speaking of embarrassment, Evan. I am speaking of survival. He turned his face away, staring into the garden. I reached into the folder I had brought with me and slid a faded page across the table. It was a hospital bill, the one from the night he seized in my arms. His eyes flicked down, then froze. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because you need to remember. You were 10 years old. The doctor said the treatment would bankrupt us. I signed anyway. Your father pawned his cufflink. I begged the billing office for 1 more week. We kept this house because I refused to let you die. This villa is not a burden, Evan. It is proof that we fought for you. And now you are trying to sell it as though it were a set of keys you can hand over at a wedding." He pressed the paper with his palm, staring at the faded ink. His mouth opened, then closed. His face looked younger in that moment, haunted. "Sloane says we need it," he whispered. "The debts. The startup failed. We're drowning. She told me if I don't deliver, we'll lose everything." I wanted to reach across the table, to hold his hand, but I kept mine folded. "Evan, you are my son. I love you more than any walls or deeds. But love is not obedience to destruction. I will not sacrifice myself to cover your mistakes. You say you are drowning. That is tragic. But you are trying to drag me under with you, and that I cannot allow." He looked up sharply, his jaw trembling. "You make it sound so simple. You think I want this? You think I wanted Sloane to pour wine on you?" "She pushes, Mom. She pushes every day." "Then you must learn to stand," I said softly, "even if it means standing apart. I cannot teach you that lesson anymore. You are a grown man. But I can show you who I am. I am not a blank signature. I am not a silent victim. If you cannot protect me, I will protect myself." His eyes filled with something between shame and fury. He shoved the paper back toward me. "You're making this bigger than it has to be. Lawyers, trusts, court petitions. Maybe if you had just agreed, none of this would have happened." I picked up the hospital bill and folded it neatly. No, Evan. If I had just agreed, I would already be gone. He stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the stone. For a moment, he looked like the boy I once knew, lost, frightened. But then the man returned, shoulders squared in defense. I don't know how this ends, Mom. But you're pushing me into a corner. No, I said quietly. I am offering you a door. Whether you walk through it or not is up to you. He left without another word, the echo of his footsteps fading down the hall. I sat alone on the terrace until the sun sank, clutching the folded paper, my heart heavy yet strangely clear. I had not won him back, but I had planted something, a seed of memory. Whether it would take root, I could not yet know. After Evan left the villa that evening, I sat for hours replaying our conversation. His words about debts and pressure lingered like an echo I could not silence. I wanted to hate him, to harden my heart completely, but a mother's mind rarely rests in absolutes. Against my will, I imagined his life outside these walls, and what I saw in my mind was not strength, but entrapment. I could picture him in the cramped office he once called a startup headquarters, whiteboards filled with ideas that never found investors. He had borrowed against credit cards, taken loans with interest rates that multiplied like weeds. Each month, the bills must have arrived in suffocating waves, the numbers growing larger as his sense of control grew smaller. I imagined him staring at those statements late at night, the same way I once stared at hospital invoices when he was a boy. The difference was then, I fought for his life. Now, he gambled with mine. Sloane's voice would have been ever present in those rooms. She is not a woman who whispers her desires. She demands them. I imagined her leaning across their kitchen counter, eyes flashing, telling him that real men provide, that she did not marry him to live in rented spaces or drive second-hand cars. Her words must have cut deeper than any creditor's notice. To prove himself, he promised more than he could deliver, and the only treasure left within reach was me and the villa. It hurt to think of it, but I saw him caught between two fires. On one side, his wife's hunger. On the other, the shame of disappointing me. A son trapped, perhaps even believing that betrayal was his only exit. I remembered the boy who once clung to me during storms, begging me not to let the thunder take him. Now he had grown into a man who let another storm dictate his choices. Perhaps he told himself it was survival, that sacrificing me was better than losing everything else. But sacrifice is only noble when it is your own. When you place another on the altar, it becomes cruelty. My mind painted him pacing at night, bills scattered on the table, Sloane's demands sharp as knives. Maybe he picked up the phone more than once, tempted to call me, to confess, to beg for help. And maybe each time he set it down, too ashamed to let me see his weakness. Shame can be a heavier chain than debt. I do not excuse him. To understand a wound does not mean to forgive the hand that made it. What he allowed at that wedding, what he signed in those fraudulent papers, what he failed to stop, all of it cut me to the bone. But as I sat with the memories, I saw the shape of his prison. And I saw how Sloane had turned him into an accomplice by holding his failures like weapons. It is a strange thing, being a mother. Even in betrayal, I searched for reasons to still call him my son. I thought of the day he brought me wildflowers, dirt still clinging to their roots, and told me he would never let me be lonely. I thought of his laughter echoing in the villa's halls when he was young, pure, and uncalculated. Those memories did not erase what he had done, but they reminded me that he was not born for this. He was shaped into it, pressed by greed, by failure, by the weight of a marriage that fed on conquest instead of compassion. As night deepened, I whispered to myself, understanding is not forgiveness. I could pity the trap he was in, but I could not release him from responsibility. The court would ask who had forged, who had lied, who had tried to strip me of capacity. His name would be there, along with hers, and pity could not change the truth. Still, in the quiet, I held on to a thin thread of hope, that one day he might remember the boy who drew castles in chalk and made promises without being asked. But until that day came, if it ever did, I would stand firm. My dignity, my home, my name, these were not negotiable. The weight of his struggles might explain his choices, but it did not absolve them, and I would not let compassion be twisted into surrender. The night before the trial, the villa was hushed, almost reverent. I moved slowly through its rooms as though I were preparing it for judgment too. Every creak of the floorboards, every familiar shadow, felt like a witness standing with me. I lit only one lamp in the study, leaving the rest of the house in twilight. The red folder sat on the desk, swollen with documents, a silent arsenal waiting for morning. I found myself drawn once again to the cedar box. My hands lingered on its lid before I opened it. Inside lay the fragments of my past: Robert's cufflink, the faded hospital bill, Evan's childlike sketches of the villa. Tonight, they felt heavier than ever, relics of promises both kept and broken. I lifted the hospital bill, the paper brittle under my fingers, and pressed it against my chest. It was proof of why I had fought all these years, and also proof of how far I had fallen in my son's eyes. On the desk, I unfolded the napkin from the wedding, still stained with dried Cabernet. The blotch had turned from crimson to a dark rust color, but its outline was sharp. I smoothed the fabric flat, studying it as though it were scripture. That stain was humiliation, yes, but it was also clarity. It marked the line between the years I stayed silent and the moment I began to fight. I whispered a prayer, though I wasn't sure to whom. I don't ask to win, I said softly. I only ask for truth to be seen. If tomorrow brings justice, let it be because I stood without fear. Ruth had warned me to be ready for cruelty. They will try to provoke you, she told me earlier that day. They will call you unstable, fragile, incapable. If you falter, they will use it as proof. You must hold steady, Alma. No matter what they say, your dignity is your strongest evidence. Her words repeated in my mind now, steadying me. I knew she was right. Courtrooms are not only about facts, they are theaters where perception becomes verdict. If I let tears overwhelm me, they would call me erratic. If I raised my voice, they would call me unhinged. My silence would need to speak louder than their accusations. I sat down and wrote in my journal, lines that might never be read by anyone but me. They want me erased. But tomorrow, I will write myself into the record. Not as a relic of age, not as a confused woman, but as Alma Hart, keeper of memory, defender of dignity. The pen moved more easily after that. I wrote down what I wanted to remember in the courtroom. The warmth of Evan's small hand when he was a child. The sound of Robert's laughter echoing in these halls. The scent of jasmine drifting in through the villa windows on summer nights. These were anchors, proof that I was more than the caricature they would try to draw. Before bed, I walked to the window overlooking the garden. The moonlight washed the hedges silver. I thought of Miguel, of Bay, of Ruth, people who stood with me not out of obligation but out of respect. Their loyalty was another kind of evidence, proof that I was not alone, proof that my worth had not vanished into age. When I finally lay down, I placed the napkin with its dried stain on the nightstand beside me. I wanted to see it first thing in the morning, a reminder of where this battle began. My heart was restless, but my resolve was firm. Sleep came slowly, threaded with dreams of voices calling me both saint and fool. In the last quiet moment before dawn, I whispered again, not for revenge, not even for the villa, for my name, for my right to still be seen. And with that prayer, I closed my eyes, ready to face the morning. The courtroom was colder than I expected, its walls tall and pale, its benches crowded with strangers who came to witness a family unravel. I sat at the respondent's table beside Ruth, my attorney, my hands folded tightly in my lap. The red folder rested between us like a shield. Across the aisle, Sloane glared, her face painted in calm arrogance. Lorraine sat behind her daughter, whispering strategy. And Evan, my son, avoided my eyes entirely, his gaze fixed on the polished floor as though it could offer him an escape. The opposing lawyer rose first, his suit sharp, his voice sharper. "Your Honor," he began, "we present evidence that Mrs. Alma Hart, age 69, has demonstrated erratic behavior and unsafe judgment. She has canceled financial guarantees impulsively, disrupted her son's wedding, and made decisions that jeopardize the stability of her family." He gestured toward me, his tone dripping with practiced pity. "This is not malice, Judge. This is concern. Our clients seek to protect Mrs. Hart from herself, to protect her legacy from being squandered by confusion, instability, and advancing decline." Each word was a scalpel, cutting away at my humanity, reducing me to a diagnosis that had never been mine. I felt eyes on me, the weight of every stranger's judgment pressing down. For a moment, my chest tightened, fear clawing to the surface. Ruth's hand brushed mine beneath the table, grounding me. The lawyer continued, parading his witnesses. A physician testified to a report I had never authorized. He claimed my memory was fading, that I had difficulty maintaining rational thought. His words were smooth, but I heard the cracks. He had not once met me, not once spoken to me directly. Still, his white coat lent him credibility in the room. Another witness claimed I was combative at the wedding, that I had disrupted the celebration with legal documents. I wanted to laugh at the absurdity. They had poured wine over me, humiliated me in front of 200 guests, and yet I was branded the disruptor. When their lawyer concluded, silence filled the room. The judge's eyes turned toward me. "Mrs. Hart, do you wish to respond?" I rose slowly, my knees stiff but my spine unbending, every gaze fixed on me. I could hear Ruth's advice in my ear. "Steady, Alma. Your dignity is your testimony." "My name is Alma Hart," I began, my voice clear though my hands trembled slightly. "I am 69 years old. I have managed my household, my finances, and my affairs without fail for decades. I raised my son in the villa they now seek to take. I worked 2 jobs to build it. I paid every bill on time, even when it meant skipping meals. And now, because I refused to sign away my home at a wedding, I stand accused of being unfit." I paused, letting the silence breathe. The spectators leaned in. My throat tightened, but I kept my tone calm. I am not confused. I am not unstable. I am not a blank signature waiting for someone else's hand. I am a woman who sacrificed, who remembers, who still reads the fine print. To call me otherwise is not protection. It is theft disguised as concern. For a moment, the room was utterly still. Even the judge's pen stopped moving. I sat down, my heart pounding but steady. That silence was my first victory. The judge gave a nod to Ruth, and she rose with the calm precision of a woman who knew her case was carved in stone. She began without theatrics, laying out bank statements, dated checks, and utility bills I had signed just weeks earlier. Her voice was even, her steps measured. "Your Honor," she said, "these are not the actions of a confused or incompetent woman. These are the records of someone fully capable of managing her life." Then came the wedding video. On the screen, the ballroom flickered into view. Guests gasped at the sound of Sloane's voice, demanding the villa. They watched her arm arc as the red wine spilled over me, the stain blooming across my dress. My calm response: "You worry about losing face. I worry about losing myself," filled the room. For the first time, I saw strangers in the courtroom cover their mouths, eyes wide, murmuring at what unfolded. Sloane shifted in her chair, her knuckles white against the table. Evan looked down, his shame written in the slump of his shoulders. Ruth let the silence settle before she produced the next exhibit. The photographs Miguel had taken of Lorraine with the real estate agents. She laid them on the evidence table one by one. Lorraine's face, sharp and calculating, pointed toward the villa grounds. Her gestures were unmistakable, a woman presenting what she had no right to sell. "Mrs. Avery," Ruth said, her tone cool, "is this you in the photograph?" Lorraine stammered, her eyes darting between the judge and the screen. I was only walking the property, nothing more." The judge leaned forward, voice firm. "Were you authorized by Mrs. Hart to show the villa to agents?" Lorraine hesitated too long. Her silence answered more loudly than words. Ruth pressed forward, sliding out a final piece, a printed email chain. My breath caught when I saw it. Sloane's name in the header, Lorraine copied. Ruth handed it to the clerk, who passed it to the judge. The room seemed to hold its breath. "Read the highlighted section, Your Honor," Ruth said. The judge adjusted her glasses and read aloud. "Once we secure the incompetency ruling, we'll transfer title before she has a chance to appeal. Keep pressure on Evan to push her signature. Without the villa, we're finished." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Sloane's face blanched. Lorraine's mouth opened, then closed. Evan covered his eyes with his hand, his body folding as if he had been struck. The judge turned sharply. "Mrs. Avery, did you write this?" For a long moment, Lorraine sat frozen. Then her chin dropped, a barely perceptible nod. The color drained from her cheeks. The gallery erupted in murmurs, the truth too vivid to ignore. The words on that email stripped away the veil of concern they had tried to wrap around me. What remained was raw greed, laid bare in black and white. I sat still, my palms flat against the table. Inside, my heart thundered, but outwardly I was calm. This was not triumph. It was revelation. The humiliation of wine, the forged documents, the whispered accusations, all of it collapsed under the weight of their own words. The judge rapped her gavel once. "Order. This court will not tolerate exploitation disguised as guardianship. We will reconvene for closing statements tomorrow. Until then, I strongly advise counsel for the petitioners to reconsider their position." Ruth placed her hand lightly over mine. "We have them," she whispered. I exhaled slowly, my gaze steady on Sloane. She would not meet my eyes now. The woman who once drenched me in wine sat trembling, her empire of lies dissolving into tears she tried to conceal. And in that moment, I understood. The truth had finally spoken louder than their schemes. The next morning, I entered the courtroom with my head high, though my knees reminded me of every year I carried. The gallery was fuller than before. Word had spread. Strangers wanted to see how the story of a mother and her son would end. I settled into my chair, the red folder beside me, and folded my hands in my lap. Ruth gave me a reassuring nod, her calm more solid than the marble columns above us. The judge began without ceremony. Her voice was measured, but there was no mistaking its weight. This court has reviewed the petition, the supporting affidavits, the testimony, and the evidence presented by both sides. We have also considered the conduct of the parties involved. She paused, her gaze sweeping the room before landing on me. The petitioners sought a declaration of incapacity against Mrs. Alma Hart. The evidence does not support such a declaration. The petition is hereby denied. Relief swept through me like a tide, but the judge was not finished. She lifted the email Ruth had submitted, the words of Sloane and Lorraine bold under the highlighter. Furthermore, this court finds credible evidence suggesting attempted financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. Accordingly, the matter will be referred to the district attorney's office for further investigation. Gasps echoed across the courtroom. Sloane's painted mask cracked. She gripped Evan's arm, her knuckles white. Lorraine sat rigid, her face drained of all color. Evan stared at the floor, his lips pressed together, as though he wanted to speak but could not. The judge's tone softened slightly when she addressed me again. "Mrs. Hart, you are free to continue managing your own affairs. This court acknowledges your diligence and record-keeping, and thanks you for demonstrating the importance of safeguarding one's rights with clarity and evidence." I inclined my head, unable to trust my voice in that moment. As the gavel struck, closing the session, I sat still for a long while. Victory, they call it. But it did not feel like triumph. It felt like survival, bare, necessary, exhausting. I thought of the hospital bill tucked in my cedar box, of Robert's cufflink, of Evan's chalk castles. My life had been a long ledger of giving, of signing my name to ensure others could breathe. Now, at nearly 70, I had signed my name for myself. I turned my head to where Evan sat. His shoulders were slumped, his face drawn. For a brief second, I saw him not as the man complicit in my humiliation, but as the boy with fevered skin, gripping my hand for dear life. Both were true. The child who needed saving and the man who betrayed me. My heart ached with the contradiction. In that silence, I whispered to myself, "I signed once so you could breathe." Today, I signed so I could breathe. Ruth touched my arm gently. "It's done, Alma. They cannot take what is yours." I nodded, though tears blurred my vision. Justice had been served, but justice is never simple. It is not a balm, it is a reckoning, and reckonings leave scars. As we left the courtroom, I carried no papers in my hands. The red folder stayed in Ruth's bag, but its presence lingered with me, a reminder that my dignity had not been erased. The courthouse doors opened onto the wide street, and I stepped out into the daylight, the sound of city traffic rising around me. For the first time in weeks, I felt air fill my lungs without the weight of fear. Justice had spoken. Now I would decide how to live with it. The morning after the verdict, the villa was quiet, in a way I hadn't felt in years. No footsteps, no voices pressing me for favors or signatures. Only the sound of wind brushing against the shutters, a reminder that silence can be a form of freedom. I stood in the kitchen with a stack of envelopes and a pair of scissors. Today was not about celebration. Today was about cutting the ties that had bound me to their control. I began with the bank accounts. Evan had once been added as a secondary signer, an old decision made when he was in college, when I believed trust was the same as love. I called the bank manager, a steady woman who had followed the trial in the news. "Yes, Mrs. Hart," she said firmly. "We'll remove all secondary access immediately. You'll be the sole authority." Her voice carried no judgment, only respect. When I hung up, I felt lighter, as though an invisible rope had been loosened from my throat. Next came the credit. Cards. Evan and Sloan had both carried supplementary cards for years, first justified as emergency backups, later used freely without a word of thanks. I took the scissors to them, one by one, the blades crunching through plastic with a sound more satisfying than applause. Each cut was a boundary restored. I gathered the broken pieces in a small bowl, fragments of what had once drained me. In the study, I pulled out a stack of automatic payment slips, the ones that funneled money toward expenses that were never mine. Subscriptions, luxury memberships, even a car lease Evan had insisted I cover temporarily. I sat at the desk with a red pen, marking each one. Canceled, canceled, canceled. My hand moved faster with every stroke. By the time I finished, the desk was littered with the wreckage of obligations I no longer carried. Then I opened the safe. The red folder sat at the top, firm and resolute. But today I reached deeper, pulling out an older binder filled with letters, receipts, reminders of every time I had stretched myself thin to keep Evan afloat. I flipped through them slowly, not with bitterness, but with clarity. The past was real, but it was no longer a debt I owed. I took out the papers that no longer belonged in my life and placed them into a box marked for storage. They were history, not present. As the afternoon sun slanted across the floor, I brewed a pot of tea and sat in the courtyard. The air smelled of lavender, and the silence felt earned. Cutting those ties had not only been financial, it was emotional. For the first time, I allowed myself to say it aloud. I do not exist to save them anymore. Bea arrived later, bringing her sharp eyes and warm smile. She surveyed the pile of canceled slips and broken cards. "Looks like you've been busy," she said. "I had to be," I replied. "It's not enough to win in court. I have to win here too, in my own house, in my own choices." She nodded, her expression softening. "This is the part no one talks about, Alma. The quiet victories. They matter more than the verdict." Sometimes I thought about her words long after she left. She was right. Court had given me recognition, but today gave me peace. Each canceled slip, each broken card, was a declaration that I was whole, capable, and free. That night, before bed, I placed the broken cards and canceled slips into the cedar box, alongside the cufflink and the hospital bill. They told a story too, the story of boundaries reclaimed, of a woman who finally learned to say no. I closed the lid, feeling the box heavier but my heart lighter. Lying down, I whispered into the darkness, "I have survived storms before. This time, I've built walls no one else can breach." And with that thought, I drifted into sleep, no longer haunted by the weight of debts that were never mine to carry. It was a week after the trial when I heard the knock on the villa door. A hesitant knock, softer than Sloane's sharp raps or Lorraine's imperious pounding. When I opened it, Evan stood there with a backpack slung over one shoulder. His clothes were rumpled, his eyes ringed with exhaustion. He looked less like the groom from the wedding and more like the boy who used to drag home after soccer practice, muddy and ashamed of a missed goal. "Mom," he said quietly, "can I stay a couple of nights?" I hesitated, memories rising like tides. The sting of wine, the courtroom accusations, his silence when I needed him most. But then I saw the way his hands hung empty at his sides, stripped of confidence, stripped even of pretense. I stepped aside. "2 nights," I said. Inside, he walked the familiar halls with eyes lowered, as though the villa itself judged him. He dropped his backpack in the corner of the guest room and came to the kitchen where I was setting down 2 plates. We ate in silence. The clink of forks filling the space words could not. After dinner, he surprised me by taking the dishes to the sink. He rolled up his sleeves and washed, while I dried. It was a rhythm we hadn't shared in years. The silence was still there, but it softened, became less hostile. At one point, he looked up, water dripping from his hands. "I don't deserve to be here," he said. I set down the towel. "That may be true, but you are here, and what you do with that matters more than what you say." That night, I passed by his room and saw him sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at nothing. I wanted to go in, to brush his hair back as I did when he was a child. But I knew he had to find his way without my hand guiding his every step. The next day, we moved together through ordinary routines. He helped me prune the roses in the garden, his hands clumsy but willing. He fixed a broken hinge on the gate. In the evening, we sat with tea in the courtyard. The jasmine was blooming, its scent rising like memory. I broke the silence first. "Do you remember the night of your seizure?" His eyes flicked to mine, startled, then softened. "Yes," he whispered. "I remember waking up with you beside me." "I thought you hadn't slept at all." "I didn't," I said. "I held you and promised myself I would never let you slip away." That night is why we fought for this villa, Evan. Not for marble floors or gardens, but because it was proof we could keep you safe. He swallowed hard, his jaw working, and I nearly took it from you. I didn't respond right away. The silence stretched, heavy but honest. At last he said, "Sloane told me I had to choose her or you. I thought giving her what she wanted would keep the marriage alive. But all it did was break me. I lost sight of who I was. You let her turn you into a weapon against me," I said, my tone steady but not cruel. "That choice was yours, Evan. Not hers, not mine. Yours." He nodded, his shoulders sagging. "I know. And I don't expect forgiveness. I don't want to lose you completely." The honesty in his voice cut through me, but I held my ground. Forgiveness is not a single act. It is a long road. If you want it, you will have to walk it, step by step. On the 3rd morning, he emerged from the guest room with his backpack again. He looked better rested, but his eyes carried the weight of realization. As I poured coffee, he stood in the doorway, hesitant. "I think I need help," he said. "Real help. A counselor, someone who can teach me how not to repeat this." I set the cup down, meeting his gaze. "That is the first step, Evan. Take it. But do not expect me to walk it for you." He nodded, shouldering the backpack. "Thank you for letting me stay." I didn't embrace him. I didn't offer soft words to erase the pain. I simply said, "Go do the work. That is how you'll know if you still belong here." When the door closed behind him, I sat alone in the quiet kitchen. My heart ached, but not with despair. It ached with the fragile hope that perhaps, someday, He might become again the boy who once drew castles in chalk. But even if he didn't, I had drawn my own boundaries, and they would hold. It was a gray morning when I found the envelope at the villa gate. The paper was cream-colored, thick, the kind used for wedding invitations and apologies that arrive far too late. My name, Mrs. Alma Hart, was written in a hand I recognized at once, Lorraine Avery's. I stood there for a moment, the air damp with drizzle, before picking it up. Inside was a check, large enough to turn heads at any bank, and a folded letter. My hands did not tremble when I opened it. The ink was dark, the sentences measured, but the desperation bled through. Alma, it began. I am writing because I have no choice. The investigation has begun. They have subpoenaed my accounts, and questions are being asked I cannot answer. I should never have let Sloane take things so far. I should never have walked those villa grounds with agents. You must understand, I was trying to protect her future. And mine. I know you will never forgive me, but please accept this check as a gesture. Think of it as a correction for the damage we caused. Perhaps it can settle the dust. I folded the letter back along its creases. The check glared up at me like a bribe dressed as remorse. My first instinct was fury. How easily she thought she could buy back dignity. How little she understood of what she had tried to take. But as I stood at the gate, the drizzle beating on my coat, I felt something quieter settle in. Not forgiveness, not yet, but clarity. I carried the envelope into the house and placed it on the kitchen table. After making a cup of tea, I sat down with a pen. On a separate sheet of paper, I wrote a single sentence. Paper knows how to find its way back home. Then I slipped her check and her letter inside a fresh envelope and addressed it to Lorraine Avery. No other words. No explanation. The return itself would be explanation enough. Walking back to the gate, I felt a release I hadn't known I was waiting for. I wasn't returning it because I wanted to punish her, nor because I wanted to prove I was above her. I returned it because I needed her to understand that restitution without responsibility is worthless. You cannot undo exploitation with ink and zeros. When I dropped the envelope into the outgoing post, a weight shifted. I realized that my strength was not in keeping what they had tried to steal, but in refusing what they thought I would accept. Dignity is not negotiable. Later that afternoon, B stopped by. I showed her the letter and the returned envelope. She read it silently, then gave a short nod. "You did right," she said. "People like Lorraine think money erases guilt. But you've drawn a line she can't cross." "I don't hate her," I admitted, surprising myself. "I don't even hate Sloane. What I hate is the way greed convinces people that love and loyalty can be bought. That's the sickness, not just in them. In so many families, B touched my hand. And maybe that's why your story matters more than just to you. Maybe it's bigger." Her words lingered with me long after she left. That evening, as the drizzle cleared, I sat on the porch with the cedar box beside me. I opened it, looked at the cufflink, the hospital bill, the chalk sketches, and now, the small envelope I had used to send Lorraine's letter back. Proof that boundaries can be drawn even after years of silence. Proof that restitution is not acceptance. I whispered into the dusk, "I release you, Lorraine. But I do not absolve you." And with that, I felt the faintest calm spread across my chest. The check would make its way back to her, and she would understand in her own quiet house that Alma Hart could not be purchased, not with millions, not with apologies written too late. The villa lights glowed behind me, warm and steady. For the first time in many years, I felt the walls breathe peace, and I knew this was the true inheritance I wanted to leave behind. Not money, not marble, but the lesson that dignity has no price tag, and justice sometimes looks like a returned envelope. The idea for the heart table came one quiet evening as Bea and I sat on the villa porch sipping tea. Ruth had joined us after work, her briefcase still at her feet, her shoulders finely relaxed. The three of us sat in silence for a long while, the sky turning shades of violet, the scent of jasmine drifting through the air. Then Bea tapped the wooden table with her finger. "This table," she said, "has heard more truth than most courtrooms." I smiled, running my hand over the grain. Robert built it from leftover beams when we couldn't afford a new one. We ate every meal here. We argued, we laughed. And now it's where we plan to survive their schemes. Ruth leaned forward. "What if it becomes more than that, Alma? Not just your refuge, a place where others can come. Women who are being silenced, families being pressed into corners. You've lived through it. You know the steps. Why not use that?" At first, the thought felt too grand. Me, a nearly 70-year-old widow, starting something new? But as the night deepened, I realized it was not grand at all. It was necessary. If exploitation could happen to me, organized, deliberate by my own blood, then it could happen to anyone. Silence had nearly cost me everything. Refusal to be silent had saved me. So the Heart Table was born, not as an organization at first, but as a circle. Women from the neighborhood came with their stories. A widow whose nephew had tricked her into signing a loan. A woman in her 50s whose daughter kept taking her pension checks just until things got better. Another who feared her son's insistence on controlling all her passwords. They came hesitant, their voices shaking. But when they sat at the table, they found a mirror in one another. Ruth guided them through the basics of trusts, power of attorney, and wills. Bea showed them how to read bank statements, how to spot forged signatures. I poured tea, listened, and shared my own story, not as a wound, but as proof that dignity can be defended. Word spread. Soon we weren't just a handful of neighbors. A retired teacher drove across town to join us. A grandmother from the next county brought her daughter-in-law, saying they needed to heal before things turned dark. The villa porch, once heavy with shadows, now glowed with conversation and solidarity. One afternoon, a woman named Mrs. Klein arrived clutching a folder of papers. Her son had tried to sell her small house by forging her name. She was terrified she'd lose it all. We sat with her at the Heart Table, and for the first time in months, she didn't cry alone. With Ruth's help, she placed the house in a protective trust. When the paperwork was finalized, she returned with a single rose as thanks. She set it in a vase at the center of the table. "Because you gave me back my home," she said softly. Moments like that filled me with a kind of peace I had thought was gone forever. Each woman's survival stitched into my own. Each victory reminded me that my story was not only for me. One evening, as we were clearing the dishes, a man approached from the sidewalk. He was older, with silver hair and a cane, a neighbor I barely knew. He held a small bouquet of wildflowers. "I came to thank you," he said, his voice breaking. "My sister was being pressured to sign over her savings. She came here last month. She told me what she learned. Because of you, she kept everything. I accepted the flowers with both hands, humbled. I only told my story," I said. "That was enough," he replied. "Because you didn't stay quiet." After he left, I sat at the table alone, staring at the wild flowers beside Mrs. Klein's rose. The wood beneath my palms felt warm, almost alive. This table had held meals, strategies, and sorrows. Now it held testimonies of survival. I thought back to the stained napkin from the wedding, tucked inside the cedar box. The red blotch was still there, unerasable. But as I looked at the flowers, I understood. Scars do not ruin the fabric. They mark the place where healing begins. That night, as I closed the shutters, I whispered to myself, the stain is clean. Not erased, but transformed. A reminder of what I had endured and what I had built in its wake. The heart table was no longer just a piece of furniture on my porch. It was a sanctuary, a circle of voices refusing to vanish. And with every new story shared, I felt the villa grow stronger, not just as a house of stone, but as a house of justice. It was a rainy afternoon when I heard the knock. The sound was hesitant, almost swallowed by the steady rhythm of water on the roof. I opened the door to see Sloane standing just beyond the gate. Her umbrella was broken, rain dripping from her hair, her hands clutching a small envelope. For the first time, she was without an audience, without a stage. There were no guests, no photographers, no murmuring crowd to perform for. Just her and me, divided by the old iron bars. She lifted the envelope as though it weighed more than she could bear. "I wrote you this," she said, her voice hoarse. "I couldn't say it to your face." I didn't move closer, but I listened. Rain slid down my coat sleeve, cold against my skin. "I was wrong," she said, her words tumbling out with surprising plainness. "That night at the wedding, I wanted to humiliate you. I thought if I broke you in front of everyone, you'd hand over the villa. I thought you were weak, but you weren't. You were stronger than I ever imagined. And I was cruel." Her voice cracked on that last word. For a moment, she looked younger, stripped of the polish and defiance that had once made her seem untouchable. I saw not the woman who drenched me in wine, but a daughter-in-law cornered by her own ambition, exposed at last. I let the silence stretch between us before answering. "You did not just humiliate me, Sloane. You tried to erase me. You wanted me to become nothing more than a signature line, a shadow. That is not a mistake. That is a choice." Her eyes filled with tears. She pressed the envelope through the gate, but I did not take it. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," she whispered. "I only want you to know I see it now. What I did, what it cost. I don't have excuses anymore." The rain thickened, drumming on the cobblestones. I thought of all the nights I had replayed her laughter at my expense, her triumph when she thought she had won. And here she was, without armor, shivering in the storm. I opened the gate only slightly, just enough to slip an umbrella through. I leaned it against the frame, keeping my hand on the threshold. "Take this," I said. "Go home dry. That's all I can offer today." Her lips trembled, and she nodded. She bent to pick up the umbrella, her hands shaking. For a moment, she looked as though she wanted to kneel, to beg. But she stopped herself. Instead, she clutched the umbrella to her chest. "Thank you," she murmured, her voice barely audible over the rain. As she turned to leave, I added, "Sloane, doors are not only for closing. They are also for teaching people how to enter." She paused, glanced back, her expression unreadable. Then she walked away, her figure fading into the curtain of rain. I closed the gate but left it unlatched, the smallest gesture of possibility. Inside, I leaned against the door, my heart both heavy and strangely light. I did not forgive her. Not yet. Perhaps not ever. But I had not shut her out completely. Later, I placed the cedar box on the table and ran my hand over its smooth lid. Inside was the napkin still stained with wine. For months, it had been a symbol of humiliation. Tonight, it felt like a scar, permanent, but no longer bleeding. I whispered to myself, "A door is not a wall. It teaches you how to step through." The rain eased, leaving the air fresh, the villa quiet. I sat by the window, watching droplets slide down the glass, each one catching the light before disappearing. Sloane's knock lingered in my ears. Not an ending, not yet a reconciliation, but something fragile, something human. The threshold had spoken again, and this time I had been the one to decide how wide it opened. 2 years have passed since the courtroom verdict, since the rain-soaked knock on my gate. Time, I've learned, does not erase scars, but it does teach them to breathe. The stain on the wedding napkin remains, but its color has faded to something softer. When I take it out of the cedar box now, I don't flinch. I see it for what it is, a mark of survival, not shame. In those 2 years, the heart table grew far beyond the villa porch. At first, it was still a small circle. Bea, Ruth, myself, and the neighbors who dared to whisper their struggles. But word spread faster than I ever expected. Women came from across the county, some arriving by bus with nothing but a folder of documents and trembling hands. They carried stories of forged checks, pressured inheritances, stolen savings. Every voice added to the chorus. We are not invisible. Soon, we needed more than a porch. Ruth suggested the community center, and the director offered us a hall on Thursday evenings. The first night we met there, the room was packed. I stood at the front, not as a victim anymore, but as someone who could say, I know what it feels like. And I know you can stand too. The applause that followed was not for me alone. It was for every woman who had survived and chosen to speak. We called ourselves the Heart Table Network. What began as tea and testimonies became workshops on trusts, seminars on financial literacy, even quiet legal clinics. Younger volunteers joined, eager to help their mothers and grandmothers hold their ground. What humbled me most were the letters, envelopes arriving from women I had never met, thanking me for showing them they weren't powerless. Some enclosed photographs of homes they had saved. Others simply wrote, "Because of you, I said no." One day, a publisher approached us after attending a session. "These stories should be heard," she said, "not whispered, not hidden, shared." At first, I resisted. My instinct was to protect, to keep the wounds of these women safe in privacy. But the women themselves urged otherwise. "If people hear us," Mrs. Klein said, "maybe they'll stop thinking we're just frail or confused or burdens." So we began writing, all of us together, each story a thread in a larger tapestry. The book became Clean Scar, a title chosen from my words at the villa porch. When it was published, I held the first copy in my hands, the pages heavy with courage. And when I spoke at the library on launch day, I saw rows of faces nodding, crying, and clapping not for me, but for themselves. Evan came to that reading. He sat in the back row, no longer hiding behind shame. In those 2 years, he had gone to counseling, step by step as he promised. He trained to become a counselor himself, specializing in family estrangement and reconciliation. He told me one evening, while helping me in the garden, "I want to make sure no one else does what I did. If I can stop even one son from betraying his mother, Maybe it means I've begun to pay my debt. We are not what we once were, Evan and I. The fracture remains, but so does a thread of repair. Some mornings he comes by with groceries, and we share breakfast quietly. Other times, he tells me about his clients, about sons who chose differently, about mothers who found peace. Each story he carries is both a wound and a salve. As for Sloane, life was not kind after the investigation. She and Evan divorced a year after the trial. The fines and the legal costs drained her, and she moved into a small apartment far from the circles where she once paraded her jewels. I rarely saw her, except in passing glances in town. And yet, one day she appeared again at the villa gate, not with demands, not with arrogance, but with weary eyes. She did not ask to come in. She simply stood there, silent. I opened the door a small crack and let silence speak between us. Sometimes silence is the only conversation possible. 2 years on, my life has become both smaller and larger. Smaller in that I no longer carry the weight of everyone's debts, everyone's needs. Larger because the circle of women at the heart table has expanded into a movement. We have chapters now in other towns. Ruth jokes that I've become an accidental activist, but I don't see myself that way. I am simply a woman who refused to vanish. The villa remains my anchor. Its walls have heard both screams and laughter, but now they mostly hear conversation, children's footsteps when neighbors bring their grandkids, and the quiet scratch of my pen as I write in my journal. I walk the garden each morning, touching the rose bushes Evan once pruned with me. I drink tea on the porch where Mrs. Klein's rose still blooms in its vase. And sometimes, when I feel the weight of age pressing on me, I place my hand on the cedar box and remind myself, I am not a relic. I am still Alma Hart. The greatest gift these 2 years have given me is perspective. Pain does not disappear, but it can be repurposed. Betrayal does not define me. How I respond to it does. And dignity, once nearly stolen, has become my compass, pointing me toward every choice I now make. As I prepare for another gathering at the heart table, I fold the wedding napkin once more and place it back in the cedar box. Its stain will never wash out, but it is clean in the only way that matters. A scar, yes, but a scar that proves I lived, fought, and healed. When I look around the villa, filled with voices and laughter, I see that my story has become more than my own. It belongs to every woman who sits at the table and finds the courage to say, I matter. And that, more than any verdict, more than any deed or dollar, is the inheritance I choose to leave behind. The rain has long since dried from the wooden porch, leaving behind faint lines that glisten like veins in the grain. Scars, yes, but clean ones. As I sit here now, with the cedar box beside me and the villa quiet around me, I understand at last. I am not a bank, not a blank line on a contract, not a burden to be shifted. I am Alma Hart. I am still here, still whole. I breathe in the evening air and whisper the words I once could not say. I am enough. My life is not measured in what others demanded, but in what I chose to protect. My dignity, my home, my name. And though there were nights when I thought I had lost them all, I see now they were waiting for me to claim them back. Before we say goodbye, I want to turn to you, the one listening. We would love to know, where are you watching from? Is it a quiet morning with a warm cup of coffee resting in your hands, the world just beginning to stir? Or is it a late night where stories like this keep you company in the stillness? Let us know in the comments. We read everyone with gratitude, and every story shared becomes part of this table we are building together. And if this story touched your heart, I invite you to consider subscribing, not only to hear more stories like mine, but to join a community that still believes in kindness, in healing, and in second chances. That is what I have learned. It is never too late to open the door again, to draw a line, to choose yourself. Thank you for spending your time here with me today. Wherever you are, in the quiet of morning, in the hush of night, I hope you carry this story with you. And remember, sometimes the miracle does not knock loudly on your door. It waits quietly, patiently, until you are ready to open your heart. Take care, and we will see each other in the next story.